around just a little bit outside of Luke. If you remember when we started the travel log, I told you that there would be multiple times that I would choose to do a sermon rather than uh, go over it in class because unfortunately there are those who are not here on Wednesday nights and a lot of good teaching in that section that we're studying in the travel log. So of course, we did the rich man and Lazarus there. I just put that up there to kind of show you where our place is in chapter 17 of Luke right now. So we want to begin tonight looking at the section that begins in verse 20. So Luke 17, verse 20. And as we go into this, I want to say I don't remember how long ago it was, but a couple of years back anyway. We had a detailed class on not this passage per se, but its parallel passage in Matthew that talks about the coming of the kingdom, Jesus' second coming, response to the on that occasion to the apostles' questions. You remember about the temple and everything. So uh, I'm not going to redo that lesson. I am going to listen to you tonight in regards to whether or not maybe in a couple of weeks I need to come back and do a lesson on that subject again. Uh, but I'll remind you what I always say when we get onto the subject of eschatology. No one knows all the answers except God, and I certainly don't. So there's always going to be some questions there I can't answer regardless. But I didn't want to skip this section in the text either for multiple reasons. So we're going to pick it up there with verse 20 tonight. Now, having been questioned by the Pharisees as to when the kingdom of God was coming, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For behold, the kingdom of God is in your midst. So the first question says simply, what is the lead in into this teaching? So, in other words, what was coming right before that? Okay, these things in this same setting here, uh, and you can see why chronologically verses 11 through 19 did not fit there like we talked about how we studied them back when we did get to chronologically in the, that part of Matthew. But so to get your flow of your context, you really got to go back to verse 10 and see the last things that he was talking about in that regard. And that would have been the false teachers and having enough faith, uh, understanding God's power to work. So if you remember when we talked about the faith question there, I told you what he was basically telling them was the little faith that they had is enough faith if they'll allow God to work through them. Uh, and that, of course, is always the case. So when he gets into verse 20 there, uh, he has that question by these Pharisees as to when the kingdom of God was coming. Now, obviously, the first thing we need to consider is what did they mean by that question?
They had so different concept of the kingdom. They were they obviously, I think, were looking for an earthly kingdom. They were looking for freedom from the Roman Empire. They were looking for a king that would have an army and that would be in charge, and he would have all that kind of stuff. The kingdom the Lord is talking about the spiritual kingdom.
Okay. So yes, their viewpoint is of the physical kingdom. I'm wanting you to encapsulate all of those things you mentioned and some other peripherals that go around it to understand that they are thinking about the messianic age. That's how they have always been taught in regard to the coming of the Messiah, that it would result in those things, but that would be to kind of give you some idea. It's very much, of course, like the premillennialist view today, that there will be this idyllic 1,000-year reign on earth. So that was pretty much their outlook toward this messianic age. And of course, we've run into this misunderstanding and the resulting conflict many times in our study of the life of Christ now. But here, their focus is on exactly what?
See,
How are we going to see it? What does that indicate to?
They think it's going to be visual.
Okay, obviously they think it's going to be something physical, something material. What else do you see in the way that Jesus is teaching here as far as, I mean, well, I guess we'll see that a little bit better. So I'll wait till verse 22 to get into that. But his immediate answer, the kingdom of God is not to be observed as coming with signs. What do you think is the import of that?
It's not going to be a parade. It's not going to be trumpets. It's not going to be anything that would normally be expected when a kingdom was to be established.
Okay. Going to be something, of course, radically different from their understanding. But we need to also recognize in this that they did think it was something that they could see approaching. And kind of a parallel, because of course he's going to get into judgment here and everything. But kind of again a parallel for today's time for us to take away applications. All these people that are constantly telling us they figured out when the Lord is going to come again, and they start listing these signs. The Middle East, of course, is great source of fodder for that, because endless conflict over there, and every time it starts up again, you get multiple people usually who come out and they have a timetable now and they've worked it all out because this is that sign. So it's important to recognize right from the beginning that they have that type of misunderstanding too. I think Twain put his thumb on it pretty good when he talks about they're thinking about the things you would see that would lead to this great revolutionary war. And so, of course, therefore, as we've seen over and over again in our study, they're missing the fact. So Jesus's answer there is the kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed. Now we're going to say, look, here it is, or there it is. And then what's the last part there, verse 21?
That the kingdom is in their midst.
Is within your midst. There is a great deal of debate over how Jesus means that. And I'll share with you that for me, I don't follow the one that I at least heard the most. It may not be the most common, but at least it's the one I most commonly encounter. But I understand it, and it's one of those situations, like I've said before, where you can make different applications. You can make different interpretations that don't conflict with other biblical teaching. And when you're able to do that, and you have multiple ones that don't conflict with biblical teaching, those are the times that you have to be careful, and you can't be dogmatic, because it could be the other way. Uh, but what did you think that he means when he said the kingdom is in your midst?
Well, Jesus is standing right there.
The presence of Jesus, right?
The reign of God in our hearts. That, you know, that when we obey the gospel, we make the Lord the Lord of our lives, and the kingdom is within us. Our desire is His desire. Our will is His will. His ambitions are our ambitions. You know, that's the way I look at it.
And that's the one that I hear the most. So that should tell you right there. That's the prominent one that I don't agree with. But again, are all true for applications. If you look at the setting and what happens, though, the Pharisees asking this question. He says the kingdom of God is in your midst. If he's talking about the reign in their heart, he's saying it's in their heart. You know, was it in the Pharisees' heart? No, not in the least. So I do think that Jesus is talking about his presence, his teaching and preaching of the kingdom, his working of the signs to show him this thing. Uh, Remember again, the answer he gave to the followers of John the Baptist when he came and asked his question if he was really the Messiah, that he'd look for someone else. And he said, uh, if you see all these things in the kingdom, it's coming. Yeah. And you look to both of their preaching, the kingdom is at hand. So I think in this setting, so I think that's true. In fact, I know it's true in other places. I think in this setting, he's more talking about his presence. They're looking for some sign, and Jesus is right there in the middle of them, and has been. And they keep looking past him, if you will. But certainly could be the other way around. I just don't see it as really fitting everything that takes place there. But that is where we start to get into the fun part. So let's go to verse 22 and following there. On the heels of saying that to the Pharisees, he said to the disciples, the days will come when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. They will say to you, look there, look here. Do not go away, and do not run after them. For just like the lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky, shines to the other part of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. Maybe I should say one thing, because it's a spur of the moment thought, so I got to weigh it out for a second. Give me a one thing just to help us out before we get into it. What is the issue with knowing when Jesus would come again?
You could sin until right before that time.
Plan to get right with God on the day before or whatever. Just think about and understand, because people get so dogmatic on these things, and so often you can hear in their arguments that they never thought about the reality of the circumstance that humanity and God are in regard to salvation, and that being the fact that it is necessary for every generation that lives upon the earth until then, for every generation to understand the imminent return of Jesus in judgment. So, in other words, it wouldn't do if he had told them, okay, it's going to be 4,000 years, before I come back. That wouldn't have worked, would it? And so, yes, Jesus is ambiguous sometimes when it comes to the date of his return. But he's clear on the fact that no man knows it. He's clear on the fact that you can't figure it out. You can't do calculations and reason from this sign and that. And so he's clear on the fact that I just want you to realize, in other words, that it could not be any clearer and have each generation live with the thought of an imminent return of Christ. There's no way it can be done. See, and so he has to answer those questions in a way where no one is able to decipher a specific date. But he is giving some very specific information on here. That's why I didn't want us to skip this section. And like I said, if we need to come back and have a class, we devote to the second coming, that's fine. But look at the specific information he gives. One of the keys you have to do is you have to decide right away, what is one of the days of the Son of Man?
When he lived and appeared on earth as man.
Well, that's going on then. And what did he say to him? He said, you're going to long to see one of the days of the Son of Man. So, in other words, that audience is going to have a great desire. And it's that same situation with he's addressing his disciples, but he has the Pharisees in the group, in the crowd, hearing everything too, and a lot of things are said for their benefit. This is said for both of their benefit, for everyone's benefit. Ed, you want to take a shot?
I think what's happening here is that Jesus himself is giving them a glimpse about what's going to happen. He ascends into heaven and they have to pay over. They're going to push that Christ back with them against some of the problems they're going to be running into. Well, share that gospel, start that kingdom.
Okay, that's certainly a possibility.
When you look at the tenor of the scriptures, the days of the Son of Man or the days of God oftentimes were judgment days, where God dealt with an issue here, or dealt with an issue here, or dealt with an issue here. The day of God, day of the Son of Man.
Look a little bit ahead. It's in this same section, and what is he going to be talking about? I preached on it Sunday.
The days of Noah.
The days of Noah, the days of Lot, and the fact that judgment came on them. So you see, he is speaking here about a day of judgment. And of course, why would Christians desperately be looking for that day?
Put haste them into that day. The persecution they were. It's a day of salvation.
A day of salvation. What makes that desire stronger? What's wrong with the church today? I can tell you what's wrong with it. I've told you before, and you didn't need me to tell you. We're too comfortable. We're enjoying this world way more than we should. And therefore we get our treasure laid up in this world. You know, I've told you the old joke probably more than once about the preacher who in a sermon asked the congregation, who in here wants to go to heaven? Raise your hand. Everybody raises their hand, but Bob here on the front row. See, one day you'll quit sitting there. Uh, and so he said, preacher thinks to himself, huh? So he asked it again. He said, I'm going to ask y'all again. Who here wants to go to heaven? Raise your hand. Everybody raises their hand about Bob. So finally, he just looks at Bob and says, Bob, you want to go to heaven? And Bob says, oh, I thought you were getting the bus sold up right now. Well, see, Jesus talking about a time when your hand would have shot up so fast, you just couldn't help yourself because you were desperate to see that day because you're not enjoying this world. And so they're going to be going through that persecution, and they are desperately going to be wanting to escape that. And if you miss this fact, it's no reason why we had to cover this. If you miss this fact, you miss the next probably 4 things, different subjects or different narratives that he touches on here. Because they all, you know, here's a big hint for you for future questions. They're all going to go back to this theme of judgment, of relief, you see. And so you need to understand that. They're going to long to see it because they want to escape this world. What does verse 23 describe? It's describing what we've already talked about a little. Yeah, that there'll be those false prophets, those false teachers that will point to different events. You know, I've been getting my Daniel stuff together because we're getting near the end of Acts. You know, these last couple of chapters will go pretty quickly. And so I've been getting that ready, and I'm looking forward to that study. But the thing about that is seeing how God has worked through history and brought everything about in its right time. And Judgment Day is going to be no different than that. And until then, there's always going to be people, just like there were so many people who use Daniel as the basis of their theology today, that they teach about the fact that they know when Jesus is coming back, because look at this, and this. You know, I'll give you a little foretaste, since it's going to be a long time before we get to that part of Daniel. That'd be chapter 9. The prophecy of Daniel, for my satisfaction, that's the caveat, okay, to my satisfaction. Many years ago, I wrote out to where I'm very confident in a lot of events, all the way until the church begins. In other words, I can take that prophecy and say, do the math on this, and this is what you get. And this is when you got to happen. A lot of my personal dating of things, and when different books are written and different events happen, go back to the correlation with that time. After the church is finished, I can't tell you anything with any certainty as far as dates go, because that's the way God set it up. Once the church was established, all we need to know is that the next thing is judgment. And that's why the church era is always talked about as being the end of days, the end of the ages, etc. Because in God's timeline, you know, everything had to be just so needed to the age of the church. And then it's the church until the end of the time, whether it ends at tonight, tomorrow, or 4,000 years from now. You know, so they are going to be easy meat, if you will, the way some people are today, for false teachers about this is the judgment day. If you remember, one of the things that Paul had to contend with was a group that started saying the second coming had already happened during Paul's lifetime. And, yeah, and upset that made shipwreck the faith of many. You got to get a shipwreck in there. You're on the coast now. So that is what he's talking about. Look at verse 24. For just like the lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky, shines to the other part of the sky. Okay, that's his example. What is that example like? Right, it's a flash, but what else is it like? We've all seen it, right? We've all seen lightning that starts over here and just shoots across the entire sky that's in our perspective. So when you see that in context, and when he goes on to say, so it would be also in the days of the Son of Man, what is he saying? You cannot miss the second coming. That's the obvious, flaw in the theory of those who had started saying that all day, and those, because there are many who still say the same thing today. And then even in the church, we have a good percentage that get confused and want to make everything relate back judgment-wise to the destruction of Jerusalem. They make the same mistake that has been made throughout history, basically. But no, when that day comes, no one's going to miss it. It's just like every eye will see him. Just like, yeah, that went across. I didn't miss that, and so he's telling them, you're not going to miss it. And that goes both for his disciples and for those Pharisees. Look at how verse 25 goes. But first, he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation, the group he's talking to. So you see, what has he just done? He just told them, even though they didn't understand it, that the judgment day would be something that his followers would dearly be looking for in their lifetime. But he had to finish his mission before that era even started, you see. And that crucifixion, by the way, is one of the things that Daniel's prophecy tells me, at least. Yeah, it tells me. But after that, I don't know. He just does not get those kind of signs to us as he did with some of the detailed prophecies. And then, like I said, to me, you can't really argue with these interpretations because what he immediately turns to as his examples of what he's talking about is the judgment on Noah and the judgment on the world in Noah's day and the judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage. What is all that?
Normal affairs of life.
That's everyday life. There's not going to be some specific sign you can say to and say, oh, he's about to be coming. It's going to be everyday life until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and was he careful to add and destroyed them all. So, and then, of course, we're going to move right in to Lot's wife. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven. And what happened? Destroyed them all. So the Son of Man is going to come for his judgment day. And yes, I believe AD 70 is some of that that's mixed in here too. I believe that's why that generation that he's talking to are going to long so dearly for his days. You know, and that audience that he's talking to outside of his disciples, those Pharisees that started this part of the conversation, you know, where are they going to be when AD 70 takes place? Most of them going to be in Jerusalem. Yeah, most of them are going to experiencing it. So a lot of things in there. So hand right.
I think one of the interesting points to me is that in the case of Noah, with his wife and his 3 sons and their wives, God destroyed the world, but before that destruction came, those 8 souls were pulled out. Before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and the 4 cities, God pulled Lot and his wife and his daughters out. When God destroys this world, what's he going to do with the church? He's going to pull us out of it before this world gets destroyed. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're right.
That's the comforting thought. We won't have to be worried about all the fire and the brimstone and the destruction, because God will pull us out just like he did Noah, just like he did Lot. He'll take the church the same way.
God has always prepared the method of salvation ahead of time because he was the one that knew his judgment was coming. So he did all those things that resulted in there being an ark for them to go into. He took the steps necessary for Lot and his family to escape Sodom. But he stresses in both cases, on that day, the same day that I did that, I destroyed. That's by the way, that's another reason why I scoff at the concept of the 2 resurrections that is often taught to try and get around some of the resurrection teaching. If you don't like a resurrection, just say, well, that's not the resurrection that I'm talking about over here, you know. But there was never been a concept of there being resurrections at different time any more than in those examples. The judgment takes place for everyone, and so that is the situation that they're in. So verse 30, it will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. And likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, on that night, there will be 2 in one bed, and one will be taken and the other will be left. There will be 2 women grinding at the same place, and one will be taken and the other will be left. So he's in the section now where he's gone to that immediate, just like the parallel passages in Matthew, where he mixes the second coming in judgment and AD 70, the coming in judgment against the Jewish nation and the destruction of Jerusalem. How do I know that?
Because when you come, there's not going to be like a separation. Some are not going to be here in their beds, still here. The judgment comes, that's it.
He has to be speaking of a time
where they had sons.
He has to be speaking of a time when they could preserve things. Why? Because otherwise it doesn't make any sense at all. The instructions about not tearing and everything. That's all. What did happen in AD 7 as far as the disciples of Christ was concerned?
Not a one of them died.
Why not?
They,
Because
or
they left and went to Pella. They went to outside of Jerusalem to safety. They fled as they were told.
They knew the signs from what Jesus had taught. He said very specifically, when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel prophesied, that was the destruction of Jerusalem, specifically the temple, and so if you, how many of you know your history? I know several of us know it. Maybe I should visit it briefly. So briefly, Emperor Titus goes along with his son Vespasian and fights the war against the Jews. That war culminates in AD 70 after a long siege of Jerusalem. The conditions in Jerusalem during that siege got worse than anything you ever want to contemplate. You know, where mothers are eating their children, where they're murdering everybody, the city segregated into a bunch of different gangs is literally what happened, and they murder each other off so they can eat each other. In the middle of that siege, because the siege is what Jesus was warning against, in the middle of that siege, they broke the number one rule of welfare of warfare. You're talking about one of the best armies that ever existed. What's the number one rule of siege warfare?
Blockade.
You can't take a day off, because if you take a day off, people can leave, supplies can get brought in. But for some reason, they broke the siege off briefly. And when they broke the siege off, the histories tell us that the Christians all fled because they knew what was going to happen. They put the siege back on, but all the Christians were gone. But they were gone because of teachings like this. That is when they couldn't remember. I mean, they needed to remember Lot's wife, because the break in the siege was very brief. You know, if you say, "Oh, here's the break in the siege, let me go get Mama's, family heirloom, and all of those things," siege goes back on. While you're doing that, you're dead. You see, so it has to be some of it applicable to that destruction. And the Christians saw it that way, read it that way, and that's how they escaped it.
go ahead.
So that is the history of the destruction of Jerusalem. Vespasian finishes it off because Titus goes back to Rome to become emperor.
That was the break that they needed.
Yeah, that was it. That's all they needed was that one crack of daylight, because they already understood what was taking place. So, and answering, they said to him, "Where, Lord?" And he said to them, "Where the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered." So he describes this event, and his disciples are like, "Okay, forget the when, where will this take place?" And because he is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, he references the gathering of the Roman armies. That word vulture fits either way, by the way, but it can also be translated eagles. So you may have a version that says eagles. Those who prefer the eagle translation one of the reasons why they do that is because, of course, the eagle was what was on the standard of the Roman armies. And so they think he's specifically telling them it's going to be the Romans on that day. And he may be because I don't know whether he said vultures or eagles. Nobody knows what he said. But either with eagles or vultures, it works. Personally, I kind of think he said vultures because he's still doing the dual symbolism of both the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the world. And the I think you could say that the world's carcass is what the vultures gather to for on the day of judgment. So, and of course, even if you said vultures, it still fits 80-70 because of the great amount of dead, which, like I said, if you've never read Josephus's description of the fall of Jerusalem, I encourage you to read it. Not close to dinner time, and I mean that. But it was horrendous. But you were seeing the pouring out of God's judgment that Israel had stored up against himself, as he told them many times. Right?
So, understand what you're saying is that this judgment that Jesus was talking about is that they would want to escape. They would want him to come back at that time, but he didn't.
No, he did come back though in judgment against Jerusalem and the overall nation of Israel. But they were looking
It's not the second coming. It's not.
back. But they would have preferred that.
A lot of people take the eagles and correlate them with the Roman army, and instead of just saying we're vultures or jackals or whatever,
Right.
whatever it might be. And that's kind of the way I've kind of always looked at it. I may be wrong, but
I said I'm sure that it's the Romans. I'm just not sure that he said eagle, whether he said eagles or vultures, because it fits the Romans either way. But yes, I'm very much aware, like I said, that the eagle was the army standard, and when you talked about a legion, you talked about their eagle. In fact, there was a movie. Been several years now, but there was a movie within the last decade about the missing eagle or something like that, telling the story of how a legion was lost and their standard was taken. You know, so that
if you had seen those ensigns coming with those eagles on there, I think you would have got it. You would have got the point.
yeah, like I said, there's no history testifies they got the point. They got out of Dodge during that brief interlude. But it's always been to me a great sign of God's providence and a good thing to end on tonight because it's going to carry over to the next things that Jesus says. And that is the fact that God did do something to deliver his people from the destruction. So just like he had prepared an ark and etc., he made a way for them to get out of Jerusalem. And it was again just if you just think logically about it, it was necessary for his telling of that, his prophesying of that, to be such that they could understand it. Otherwise, it would be useless and they would have remained in Jerusalem and been slaughtered. All right. Appreciate your attention tonight. Class dismissed.